We've all seen the devastating images of people in the flood zones in the Northern Rivers. We've seen people stranded on roofs for hours. We've seen children being rescued. We're seeing people stranded on bridges. But importantly as well, we're also seeing a community come together in supporting one another to get everyone through. And that is the spirit of the people in the Northern Rivers and right across our state. We will be doing everything, continue to do everything that we can to get everybody to safety and get these communities right across our state back on their feet as quickly as possible. We've done that in the past. We've done that as a state together, and we will do it again. I want to thank our SES volunteers, our SES personnel, the 550 working around the clock to get people to safety and importantly to provide that care and support as we move through this difficult time. Also the RFS, the police force, everyone coming together, but ultimately as well, our community. Volunteers right across the board. That spirit of service is coming out and we are witnessing it and seeing it firsthand. And that is the spirit that will continue to get our state through this difficult time. We've seen, as you've seen, as we've all seen, the flood rivers in Lismore last night are reaching 2 metres above a record high. These images are devastating and distressing. We've seen 1,000 flood rescues so far, 6,000 calls for assistance. Today, currently, there are 26 evacuation orders in place, 26 evacuation orders affecting 40,000 people. If there is an evacuation order in place, please follow the instructions and leave. Unless it is not safe to do so, and if you are unsure, please contact the SES on 132 500. In addition to that, we have 5 evacuation warnings in place. Now, these evacuation warnings affect over 300,000 people in the north. 300,000 people are currently impacted by an evacuation warning, and if an evacuation warning has been issued, please follow the instructions. If you can leave safely, please do so. Please do not wait. Please gather your belongings and please follow the instructions from the SES. As we've said yesterday, this is an unprecedented event, simply because you've been in a flood-prone area in the past and have not experienced you may have experienced events. They are not at this scale, and simply because a flood in the past has not affected you, that does not mean that this flood will as well. So please follow the instructions. If those orders are in place, please evacuate. I want to thank the public broadcaster as well as commercial broadcasters like Southern Cross who continue to provide clear, concise information to those local communities. You are doing an amazing job in ensuring that our people in the Northern Rivers and surrounds are given the information they need in a timely manner. This is a team effort and I very much appreciate the support that you are providing. This morning we have made, along with the Commonwealth, national disaster declarations for 17 council areas. Now these declarations will do the following: provide immediate financial support for those people who need it. And in addition, it also ensures that financial support with the state and the federal government is there to help our communities get back on their feet as the rivers subside. So we know this is, today we are focused on rescue. That is our number one. That is our number one focus from a state government level, from a council level, and from a Commonwealth level, and providing care and support for those people who have been isolated and obviously that are currently in one of our evacuation centres. But this will very quickly move to recovery, and we'll be doing everything we can, working around the clock to ensure that no one is left behind, that every person is back on their feet and every community continues to stand strong following this. Those natural disaster declarations, I want to thank the support of the Prime Minister and the Commonwealth Government for the continued dialogue and the support that they are providing. We will ensure that these communities are back on their feet. This morning I had the opportunity to meet with all the mayors of all those areas. I want to thank them for their engagement. We went through a whole range of issues that are currently facing those communities. Obviously in Lismore and in the Richmond Valley, There's a greater focus on rescue and aerial support right now. There are other concerns that have come through in terms of the clean-up, in terms of the infrastructure investment that's going to get these communities back on their feet. I want to thank them for their engagement, and my commitment to them has been that we will continue a coordinated response. Obviously, here at the State Emergency Operations Centre with Mal Lanyon and with Resilience New South Wales through Shane Fitzsimmons, we will ensure the recovery is the focus is not just on rescue today and ensuring care and support for those people who need it, but ultimately, in addition, we are focused on getting people back on their feet into temporary accommodation and then ensuring that the clean-up and the construction is already underway. So we've gone through this in the past, and we'll get through this together again. As I said, I want to thank the Prime Minister for his ongoing support. In addition to that, to the premiers across the country, it really does bring out the best in our nation to have many premiers offering that support to help get us through. I very much appreciate each of you for reaching out, and that support is important, and very much appreciate that from the people of our state. Thank you. Evacuation centres, as we know, are underway, and I want to thank the volunteers who are there providing that care and support. Obviously, as we move through this period, and I spoke earlier, and Shane may speak to this as well in terms of temporary accommodation and making sure that those provisions are in place. We are working through that as we speak. I want to also call out the Insurance Council of Australia. This morning I spoke to the President, Andrew Hall. Already we've seen 15,000 claims that have been made. Obviously, we expect many, many more. But I want to thank them for their engagement. I think if we look over the past, whether it's been through bushfires, whether it's been through floods, we've always relied on our insurance companies to work with the government, to work with local communities. That engagement is already there. I'm pleased to know they'll be going up this week. So very much appreciate that engagement, because the recovery and construction of and rebuilding these communities is going to be crucial, and the Insurance Council will play a crucial role in that. I also want to say as well, we know that at the moment this is focused on the north, but very quickly, as we're seeing in metropolitan Sydney now, severe and heavy rainfall, and then it will move to the south. So to all the people, particularly across the east coast of our state, these issues may come your way, and for everyone across our state, we're seeing what is happening in the north. We're seeing that collective community spirit, but ultimately as well, as this progresses, we need to continue to follow those instructions from the SES. So if those evacuation orders are made, if those evacuation warnings are made, we need to get ready. We need to work together to make sure we get through this as a state. So as I said, just in finishing, and then we'll have Steph Cook, the Minister for Emergency Services, provide an update at her end. We will then have Dean Naramore from the Bureau of Meteorology also speak about what to expect over the course of this week in weather conditions, and then the SES Commissioner Carlene York will also speak. But I think in finishing, whilst we've certainly seen devastating scenes up north, we can all take heart in the courage and the bravery that we are seeing in our people, in our frontline volunteers, in our emergency services personnel, but ultimately our people, and particularly in the north, who have gone through a very difficult time over the last few years, whether that's through bushfires and floods, and here we are again. One thing that we know, and one thing that I know as Premier, is that our people will always pull through, and we will pull through together, because that is the spirit and that is the courage and determination that we've seen in the past. It is what we are seeing in those images every single day at the moment, and that is what will continue to help our state get through. I'm now going to pass to Steph Cook, then we'll hear from the Bureau and then Carlene.
Thank you, Premier. Well, we have never seen floods like this in the northern parts of the state, and many of our areas up there remain underwater at this time. The scenes have been truly distressing, and I want to reiterate the words of the Premier. My heart goes out to all of our communities who are impacted by this event, as we speak. I want to thank the hundreds and hundreds of people in our communities who have pitched in to help out, to help our hard-working SES volunteers and volunteers from other emergency services organisations who have all worked together to do what they can to make sure that each and every person is rescued in as quickly a time as possible and that everyone is safe. Unfortunately, things are not going to get much better up there for a little while. Whilst the Wilsons River at Lismore has peaked at 14.37 metres, that river will remain at a major flood level at least until tomorrow. So as those waters come down, the emergency will continue. We will ensure that our emergency services operations remain up there working around the clock until every single person has been rescued. The priority remains on saving lives and keeping people safe. That is our priority, whether it's currently underway in Lismore or as it moves south with this event. We must all prepare ourselves for the possibility that lives have been lost. Whilst I would love to think, and I truly hope, that we will not see any deaths from this event, I think that it is unrealistic that a disaster of this magnitude will mean that there are no lives lost. But to that end, we will continue to work with our communities closely. And once again, I want to thank our emergency services volunteers and everyone who's just working so hard up there to get resources out to people as quickly as possible and to ensure that wherever possible we rescue people in a timely fashion. As this event moves south, people in Sydney and on the South Coast have time. We have seen what has unfolded in the northern parts of the state over the past few days. The time to prepare is now. If you are the subject of an evacuation order or a warning in the north, please heed the advice of the emergency services organisations. We do not make these decisions lightly. They are based on the good information, the best information that we have available at the time. And so I would implore people to prepare. And that extends to people in Sydney and also to people now on the South Coast. If you are a primary producer on the South Coast, please look to move your stock to higher ground now. You have time to prepare now and we want you to. Help us help you. And the best way for you to help us is to be prepared. Have an emergency services kit prepared with your medications, with your important documents, your laptop computers, mobile phones and chargers, so that we can, as best as possible, keep track of where you are, that you can contact us if you need to, but more importantly, that you can be prepared to evacuate should the need arise. Finally, before I pass over to Commissioner York for her operational update, I want to send a huge thank you to our SES volunteers and, of course, our other emergency services volunteers. Whilst I stand here as the Minister very, very proudly in the SEOC, overseeing a statewide effort currently, my heart is with you. And I would love nothing more than to pull on my orange strides right now and stand with you in the pouring rain and the deep waters, helping the people of our communities. That's where my heart is. I know that you are tired. We know that you have been backing up for one disaster after another for the past 2 years. I know that many of you have been out into the western parts of New South Wales where we've experienced a flood that's gone on and on for months and months, and you've helped those communities only to return home to find your own communities in this level of distress and this emergency. We need you to keep going, and I'm so deeply grateful to each and every person in the communities that the SES and our other emergency services organisations are operating in. You can see how hard our emergency services volunteers are working, and you're doing everything that you can to support them. And to each and every member of our community, I'm very, very appreciative. I know that our volunteers are as well. We need you to continue doing that. The effort will need to go on for several days. And I just at this point in time want to say thank you. We're thinking of you. My heart is with you. We will get through this. We will get out the other side of this. And we're very, very grateful for your efforts in helping us get to the other side of what is unfolding at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and good morning, I should say. My name is Dean Naramore and I'm from the Bureau of Meteorology. And firstly, reiterating some of the comments we've already heard, it has been a devastating and stressful time for our residents in northeastern New South Wales, and multiple rivers are still in major flooding across in that part of the world, including the Tweed, the Clarence, the Richmond and the Wilsons River. The good news is the rain has stopped up there late yesterday, and we're not expecting any more widespread rain in that part of the world for the coming days. But we've had such incredible rainfall numbers that we're likely to see the very slow subsidence of the water across multiple rivers, and they are falling across many catchments in there, but because they are so high and there is so much water in the system, it'll take a long time for that water to slowly move through. But the good news is the rain has stopped, the flooding has subsided, but we are still in major flood levels on many rivers through today into tomorrow morning. Now, the low pressure system that drove all of that weather moved off the north coast of New South Wales yesterday. It has slightly deepened overnight and now starting to move south to southwestwards back towards the central coast of New South Wales. So that means we're going to see the rain increase across the central coast of New South Wales, and that's anywhere from the Hunter all the way down to the south coast of New South Wales. Now that includes Newcastle, the Sydney metropolitan area, Wollongong and inland towards the Blue Mountains, and our communities that are sitting through the hills from the Hunter all the way down to the south coast of New South Wales. A severe weather warning is current for heavy rainfall and damaging winds for today and tomorrow for much of this coastline, extending from Newcastle all the way down to around Bega. Now that we could see 6 hourly rainfall totals anywhere from 50 to 150 millimetres, with isolated falls in excess of that and possibly up to 200 millimetres. And that'll be particularly with thunderstorms or any convergence zones that set up near the coast. Now, why this is a concern is because catchments and rivers are already wet across much of central and southern parts of New South Wales, and we're likely to see this kind of rainfall possibly lead to, again, flash and riverine flooding for many of our rivers, creeks and catchments in this part of the world. Now, we have flood watches also current, extending from much of the area I just mentioned. Flood watches are current from the Hunter all the way down to the south coast of New South Wales, and that includes many river catchments all inland towards the mountains as well. We also have a hazardous surf warning current for much of the New South Wales coast, and we could see coastal erosion, particularly near and to the south of wherever this low pressure system develops. And where the areas of heavy rainfall develops will also be highly dependent on the exact intensity and track of this east coast low as it moves closer towards the coast later today and into tomorrow. And because of that, we're likely to see, as I mentioned, flash and riverine flooding, and these damaging winds could also be enough to bring down trees and power lines. And also with this kind of rainfall on many saturated catchments and soils, it could also lead to hazardous driving conditions. So to reiterate, severe weather warnings current for heavy rainfall and damaging winds from Newcastle all the way down to the south coast, extending inland towards the hills. Hazardous surf warning is current for dangerous and hazardous surf conditions for much of the New South Wales coast, extending from Byron Bay all the way down to the Victorian border, and that will continue for today and tomorrow. And we're also flood watches current for many of these catchments for flash and riverine flooding. And for those who are also looking at updating the flood watches at the moment, at this stage we're talking a minor, could even see some moderate flooding on some rivers and catchments as well. And for those interested, obviously we're very interested in the Hawkesbury and the Nepean area. At this stage we're expecting moderate flooding with this kind of rainfall numbers, and the upper Nepean we could see are on watch for moderate to possibly major flooding, but definitely moderate at this stage. It is all highly dependent on the track and intensity of this low over the coming days, but it is going to be a wet few days through central and south coastal parts of New South Wales, so please stay up to date with the latest forecasts and warnings via our website, app and social media. And for some of the impacts, I'll now pass you on to the Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Premier. Thank you. So our operational tempo remains extremely high. As the front is moving south from the Northern Rivers District, we are still operating in a rescue mode up in the Northern Rivers. There are still people needing our assistance to rescue them and take them to places of safety, from the Tweed area right down now towards Ballina, Murwillumbah, where there are evacuation orders in place. So our volunteers and partner agencies are out there making sure that we are responding to any calls for assistance, and we are giving priority to life-threatening situations. We've heard the Bureau's weather report. There will be storms, there will be trees down, there will be roof damage, there will be power breakages. We are working with the liaison officers of all government departments and energy providers in relation to that. But I ask the community to be patient, because we will be doing rescue operations first and prioritising that over property damage. So the SES are now leading preparations, as said by the Bureau and forecast. We're working very closely with the Bureau in relation to our preparations for the Central Coast, the metropolitan area and the South Coast, and into the mountain ranges as well towards the Southern Highlands and Southern District. We are preparing those communities, and as the Minister said, we ask those communities to help us prepare. There's a lot of sandbagging going on, and we always want volunteers to come to the SES units to help with that sandbagging, because that can prevent the loss of life and it can prevent property damage as well. If I just go back up into the Northern Rivers, as said, the cell has moved south, but the rivers are still up. There is still danger to those people who might want to go around the community. We would ask people not to go and sightsee in these dangerous areas, not to go into the areas subject to evacuation orders. I know homeowners and business owners will want to get back in and see the damage. I ask you, please don't do it while the evacuation order is still current. We will be going, at the same time as doing all the other preparations and response, into those areas to assess the damage, and when we can, lift that evacuation order so you can go in. We will then hand over to recovery, and that will be done seamlessly, and I know Shane and his team from Resilience are already working with the community and their plans in relation to that recovery. But please, as community members, don't put your life in danger again by going into those areas when it's not safe. The waters are polluted, there's a lot of debris, a lot of roads are still cut, and it is not safe to go back. So please remain patient. I'd like to thank also the mayors and the local communities for assisting. We did rely on their assistance yesterday in relation to some rescue operations, and I'd like to thank the community for what they have been doing in supporting the SES and our partner agencies through this devastating event. As I said, we will be putting a lot of communication out, so the best place to go is the Bureau for the weather forecasts and the SES website to look at what is happening in your area. Also, live traffic provides a lot of information in relation to what roads are cut and where you can travel safely. I remind people not to travel through floodwaters. If they see that the roads are cut, turn around and find another path. If it is not essential travel, please refrain from doing it, and just make sure that you remain safe and you look after yourself, your family and the other community members. But you also look after my volunteers who have to put their life in danger to go out and rescue you if you've made a poor decision. So it will be very busy over the next few days. We will be continuing our communication, continuing our message and working with the community, but importantly our emergency service stakeholders, to make sure that we can respond adequately to this event and to make sure that we can keep you safe. Thank you.
Questions?
Question for the Bureau, please. So are there any concerns at the moment for flooding downstream of Warragamba, and are you able to give us a bit of an insight into which parts of metropolitan Sydney are likely to see flooding if the rainfall eventuates?
Yeah, that's right. So it's going to be a wet couple of days through much of the Sydney metropolitan and also right up as we get into the far western parts of the area. Now in the far western suburbs, we're looking at the rain continuing as well. At this stage, generally a minor to moderate flooding with the current forecast rainfall, but as I mentioned, it is really highly dependent on that low. If the low crosses just to the north of the Sydney area, that means the heaviest rain and the strongest winds will then cross right through the metropolitan area. But if it does shift south of our area, that will then keep the rain offshore, and we're probably talking more of a minor flooding expected for many of the communities that are on the Hawkesbury Nepean. If that heavy rain does eventuate, we're probably talking closer towards moderate flood warning, even into the Richmond and Windsor area as well.
Premier, just on that, on Warragamba Dam, have you started having those conversations? I know there were concerns around this time last year where we saw floods in the area about when we released water. Are we at that point yet? It's quite
Water New South Wales are in charge of the decisions to release water, and they are releasing some water from that dam. What they have to do is assess the risk of increasing the chance of flooding downstream by the release of that water. Currently, the dam is at around 94% full, and we work with Water New South Wales and take their advice in relation to what they can safely discharge in preparation. But depending on the rain, we saw massive increases in Warragamba Dam this time last year in the floods, and that was coming out of a drought. So we're keeping a very close eye on that, and we'll be making sure that we communicate any risk to the communities as soon as we're aware of them and issue any warnings in preparation for evacuations when needed.
So if we see that forecast rainfall eventuate, is it more likely than not that we will see some releases from that dam that could lead to flooding?
If we see significant rainfalls, you might see a spill from the dam, but the dam is already releasing water as we speak and has been releasing it for some time.
Can I just Premier, we've seen the weather event unfolding in Queensland. Why weren't we better prepared? Should we have sent people to northern New South Wales earlier to do things like sandbagging before things escalated to this level?
I mean, this is a 1 in a 1,000 year event. This event is unprecedented. What I do know is that we have the best volunteers any state could have on the ground, providing support to our communities who are affected. And this is a shocking event. It is a distressing event. And I can assure you that our government is working around the clock to provide the care and support that people need, and will continue that work just as we have with the bushfires and with the drought as we move through. There is a human cost to these disasters, and not just human physical, but also psychological, and the impacts can be long lasting. So these, yes, there is, as the Commissioner has said, there is a focus on the here and now, ensuring that that care and support is provided, that those rescues are undertaken, that people are kept safe. But ultimately as well, this is going to be a substantial clean-up. And talking with the councils today, they understand, the mayors today, they understand very well the impacts because of the challenges in the past. But I mean, what we're seeing in Lismore, what we're seeing in the Northern Rivers, we have never seen before. And what we will do now is continue to provide that support and ultimately make sure we rebuild as quickly as possible and that no community is left behind. What I might do is get Shane to speak to us. Shane, do you want to add a bit in terms of preparation for those? Yeah, I'll get Shane.
So as has been indicated, our focus right now is to support the SES in their lead role with the ongoing response effort, but already communicating with our regional and local teams, communicating with our state colleagues, and importantly our federal colleagues, is gearing up for what we saw similarly through the March floods of last year, which hasn't been done before on scale, and that is we consider many thousands of firefighters from the RFS, from Fire and Rescue, matched with Australian Defence Force personnel. Some of the most challenging and confronting periods of this sort of large-scale flooding event is once the water recedes, it's the mess and the damage and the destruction that's left behind in businesses, in homes, in properties across the community. So partnering with organisations like Public Works and Environment and local councils, how do we get these armies of men and women in with the right equipment, with the right gear to help them on that critical washout, clean-up, removal of significant volumes of waste, many hundreds of thousands of tonnes of waste as we saw in previous regimes. So they're the sorts of preparedness and engagement arrangements and considerations that are currently being contemplated. As the Premier and the Minister indicated, we've got the natural disaster declarations in place. We're framing up the financial arguments to support those clean-ups and other support measures that will be critical in the immediate short-term, medium-term and much longer term, because this flood will go on for weeks, but the recovery will go on for months and years.
As you're aware, there's some scrutiny around Resilience New South Wales, where the taxpayers are getting value for money there, given that it seems we were underprepared, under-resourced for this emergency. Do you accept that criticism, and do you think the government and yourself could have done more?
So what scrutiny are you talking about, sorry?
Obviously there's a $720 million budget for Resilience New South Wales. Some people are saying, is that money well spent when a lot of the resources that these communities need aren't being realised? Oh,
look, absolutely, and I can say that the figure you've got is probably a little inaccurate, but indicative of more than 92% of our budget is dedicated to critical programs and supports right across the state, focused, remembering that we're not even 2 years old as an organisation at the moment. We were created on the back of the state's worst ever bushfire disaster, a scale of complexity and a magnitude like we've never seen before, with thousands of homes razed to the ground, businesses, livelihoods, etc., completely decimated. The focus has been on recovery, repair, rebuilding, reconstruction and healing. Those programs that we currently have in our budget reflect that ongoing commitment to not just the bushfires, but the number of storms and floods that have happened since. Floods and storms in February of 2020, significantly in March of 21. And what a lot of people don't realise, because particularly Sydney, outside of Sydney, the Minister's been presiding over more than 70 natural disaster declarations across regional and rural New South Wales following storms and flood events of the last 3 to 4 months particularly. Adding on top of that now this extraordinary disaster in northeast New South Wales, another 17 local government areas declared natural disasters. So we've got a significant challenge across the state, all being done under a backdrop of COVID with many variants and significant constraints and challenges and displacement right across the state that has compounded and challenged recovery, rebuilding, healing right across different communities. So those sorts of grant packages are reflective of a broader remit of leadership and coordination that we undertake with partner organisations at the state level, non-government organisations, community organisations. 75,000 hampers were distributed to people displaced during the COVID pandemic. So we're talking large-scale, significant displacement, consecutive, damaging disasters and stressful times for people across New South Wales. That's what the budget is focused on. We're a relatively small team in the scheme of things, of just over 200 people. The bulk of those have only been recruited in the last 3 to 6 months. So I'm very comfortable with whatever scrutiny wants to be applied to the role of Resilience New South Wales and how we partner and coordinate and support communities across the state with what's going on, but also with an eye to the future, with our work on developing up the first state resilience strategy, which will be with government towards the middle of this year, focusing on natural disaster risks across the state and what we can do together as councils, as a state government, and leverage particularly the national arrangements for disaster preparedness and adaptation spending to look at things like investments, low-cost, no-cost programs of awareness and what have you, right through to significant infrastructure investments that will help build resilience and capacity to not only anticipate and understand what they might be vulnerable to, but what sort of things can we invest in going into the future to ensure we limit the likelihood, limit the impact and build that resilience.
Premier, just talking about resources. Just talking about resources. Budget estimates this morning heard that Parks and Wildlife have 5 helicopters that are currently on the ground that haven't been called on for use. We know there's still a lot of people needing rescues. Why haven't they been called on, and shouldn't they be up in the sky?
Well, that's not the advice that I've received, and Shane will speak to that.
The Minister this morning at a budget estimate said.
Yeah, but I've received contrary advice in relation to that point, and I'll have Shane speak to it. I just want to make this point. Through the standing up of the State Emergency Operations Centre and the experience that we've had right across government with natural disaster after natural disaster, from bushfires and floods again, the coordination that I have witnessed, both as Premier and as in my previous role, is that it is second to none in terms of all agencies working together. And my commitment is to ensure that every single person, every single community gets back on their feet as we move through this difficult period of time. This situation is distressing for many, and it will affect more. The ultimate focus now is saving lives and getting people to safety. But as we move through this period of time, as Shane has indicated, the clean-up and getting communities back on their feet will take weeks, months and years. And we've seen that in the past. We're talking to the councils about it today. The mayors and the general managers, based on the experience we've had up north, particularly with the bushfires in the past, and how we work together partnering with councils. And what is most important, what is very clear to me, is that there needs to be clarity and certainty in relation to the obligations that are in place for clean-up, to learn from the lessons of the past, to make sure that the clean-up can occur as quickly as possible when the flood waters subside. And that's what we will be focusing on right across government as we move through this period. As I said, there are still difficult times to go. As the Minister has pointed out, and as the Commissioner has pointed out, the worst could be yet to come. Despite the fact that in the north we are seeing rain dissipate, the flood rivers remain a real risk to people's lives. And we will be doing everything we can to get every person, every family, every business back on their feet as quickly as possible. We've done that in the past and we'll do it again. In relation to the resourcing question from the National Parks and Wildlife Service, I might just get Shane to speak to that because that's not the advice I've received.
We haven't called on the National Parks and Wildlife. It's naive to think that a helicopter pilot, because they can pilot a helicopter, can do a rescue. It is a highly technical, well-trained skill to land on a roof. I've seen some amazing pictures of what our helicopter pilots have done to land on a hip of a roof in the middle of a storm where it's wet, to let their officers get out of the helicopter and save the lives of our community members. It is, I'm absolutely in awe of them. National Parks and Wildlife are not trained for the purposes of our rescues to go and rescue community members. I would love it if we could have more helicopters, but I also am not going to put the lives of our helicopter operators at risk, as well as the community that may be under that helicopter. So we have got every resource that we can have spread across the northern rivers and into now the mid-north coast to help the community get to safety. And with well-trained people who have trained for many years to do this and have done many flood rescues before, or bushfire rescues, or any natural disaster, to bring that community member or families to safety at another location.
Can I just say, in relation to that, what we should be doing right now is playing politics in the middle of a natural disaster, a 1 in 1,000 year natural disaster. We'll take the advice from the SES in relation to what resources they need. When resources are required through to those premiers reaching out and providing that support, we will utilise that resource. But what we won't do is endanger other areas of the public service without following the advice of our experts. That's exactly what we're going to do.
And Premier, just on the meeting with the mayors this morning, are you able to give us an insight into how that meeting went? What was the feedback from some of the mayors, and was there anything that they actually requested of the state government that isn't already happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously different local government areas are in different situations at the moment. So obviously in the Richmond Valley and Lismore and the Tweed, they're in the middle of this right now, whereas others are on the periphery, but the same issues will obviously come together at a point in time. The biggest issues in those areas were more aerial support and making sure that those people who are isolated are rescued as quickly as possible. And identified as quickly as possible, that support is provided in relation to the evacuation centres across the state, which are obviously up and running. One of the key areas that came through was a movement to temporary housing, and I know that the government is working on that. Also in relation to Category D emergency funding support, ensuring that determination is made as quickly as possible in the past, the feedback from them has been that has taken time. Also in relation to the clean-up, that the commencement of the clean-up and the connection between the state government and the local government and the responsibilities is clarified as quickly as possible. I've said to them that I will work through that over the course of the day and come back to them as soon as possible once we have that information. And then going forward, just ensuring that funding is provided. There are other issues in other areas in relation to telecommunications support and also mudslides in areas as well, which is causing certain danger, and the support that may need to be required there. We've agreed that we'll meet every few days as we move through this period and in a very constructive dialogue, in the sense that it's not just about the here and now. Yes, it's about ensuring, as we've said, we're focused on getting people to safety as quickly as possible, but an understanding between both myself and them that working together will identify gaps as we move through this period, but a complete focus at both the local government and state government level to work together to get every single community back on their feet as quickly as possible.
Are you able to give us an update on the death toll? Is that something you can...
No, I might pass something on.
Well, so far in this event in the Northern Rivers, we haven't had any further fatalities. There are some people reported missing. I know there's a lot of activity on social media of people not being able to contact loved ones or friends. That may be that they are actually in danger. It may also be the intermittent communications we're having up there at the moment. I would invite anyone who was concerned about their family members or loved ones or friends. There is a site on the Red Cross about register, find, reunite. Please go on that site and register your concerns for your loved ones, because that is set up to try and identify and obviously reunite those loved ones with the concerned members of the community. And that will really help us to take those details and have the Red Cross assist us, both searching the evacuation centres and working with New South Wales Police in relation to locating anyone who can't be contacted.
Are you preparing for fatalities that may be people that were unable to get out of their houses in time? We've heard some pretty hair-raising rescues of people only having just centimetres left before the water came above.
Yeah, so I've had some quite dramatic rescues informed to me. You just have to look at Queensland and what's happened up there. We're suffering the same sort of significant event down here. I hope that there are no more fatalities, but I can't ignore the fact that there may be people we can't contact who may be the subject of a significant effect of those floods and not be able to be saved.
Do we know how many people we're expecting, either for yourself or for the Bureau, the severe weather that we're expecting to move into the Central Coast and Sydney metropolitan area? How intense is that going to get? Are we going to see a repeat of the 2016 Northern Beaches storms when Narrabeen was impacted?
Okay, I think I'll allow Dean to answer that one from the Bureau about the forecast.
Hi, thank you. And question. So this East Coast low, which is the one that's brought the heavy rain and the damage and the devastation across southeast Queensland and northeast New South Wales, it is off the coast of New South Wales and going to move closer. At this stage, it's not looking anywhere near as intense or strong as what we've seen in the previous events that we saw, those devastating East Coast lows, particularly in June 2016, and also more recently as well through the March 2020 and 2021 floods. This is more of a compact system, so that's why it is highly dependent on where exactly that low tracks, because the worst of the weather, the strongest winds, the heaviest rainfall, and the worst of the beach erosion will occur near and just south of where that low pressure system crosses, if it does, or when it comes close to the coast. At this stage, we're thinking definitely somewhere in the Central Coast, around the Newcastle area, down to around the Wollongong area. Obviously, that does include Sydney, but again, how that develops into tonight and early tomorrow will be highly dependent on the worst of the impacts will be. But severe weather warnings remain current. Heavy rainfall is likely, with isolated totals up to 200 millimetres possible. Coastal erosion is also quite likely, particularly south of the low, where those strong onshore winds will lead to coastal erosion and damaging and hazardous surf. And we're also likely to see damaging winds that could bring down trees and power lines, and also landslips and mudslides as well. We've already seen that in northeastern parts of New South Wales, and they are also possible, particularly in our hilly terrain, wherever the heaviest falls do occur. So dangerous and hazardous driving conditions as well. So travel in the next few days will be quite dangerous. So, but please be careful if you are out there.
Shane, can I just ask a bit more about what Resilience New South Wales' role has been sort of in the lead up to this? It is obviously one of the most flood-prone areas of our state, and we've now got close to 1,000 people who are stranded up there, possibly on roofs and other places. What has been the role of Resilience New South Wales?
So in relation to what?
Into any sort of preparations, or into what have you been doing, here?
So effectively, floodplain risk management is a responsibility of local government. There's an extremely close partnership with the State Emergency Service as our designated lead combat agency for storms and floods across New South Wales, the state plan and then local sub-plans at those local community levels. As we've indicated, all those other arrangements around preparing for relief, washout and clean-up, the recovery programs, the coordination and connection with the Commonwealth Government, record levels of coordination and connection with the Commonwealth Government, and our partnerships with local governments, they're the sorts of support and assistance regimes that we provide to the lead combat agency SES. And then as we transition more into the relief and recovery arrangements, we have a statutory responsibility for leading and coordinating the state's effort in relation to recovery.
Shane, what about the temporary accommodation that's being arranged? Has that started? Where is it? Yep. Where are people going?
So as we identified, it's a pretty moving situation, like the disaster is. The last count was about 17 recovery centres. We formerly had about 1,400 people registered through those recovery centres. At this stage, we expect those numbers to be in the hundreds higher because of the connectivity issues and the registration arrangements. But so far, the temporary accommodation has been to less than 100 people, 80-odd people at this stage. But we're already working with local emergency management committees, Department of Community and Justice and other partner organisations, looking at accessing key facilities like local sport and recreation centres that have got commercial kitchens, accommodation and facilities and amenities that can accommodate people in the short term. We need to realise, as we've seen during the bushfires, the storms and floods and COVID, temporary accommodation and housing is a significant challenge right across the state and right along the ranges, but working together with our partner organisations, that's already work in progress, and we expect to see, with the considerable inundation and displacement that we're going to need once again, more emergency accommodation. Evacuation centres are simply that. We don't need to kid ourselves. They're not hotels, they're not luxury appointments. They're places of safer refuge where we provide function and amenity as best we can for people that are seeking refuge from high-risk situations, and then that emergency accommodation transitions through beyond that evacuation phase.
Would you support a private member's bill that would see fines introduced for people who deliberately drive through floodwaters with the revenue to go to the SES? It's an idea that one MP is sort of suggesting.
I'll seek advice on that. What is clear, and we say this every single flood event, do not drive through floodwaters. And every single flood event, people drive through floodwaters. Do not do it. Do not take the risk. Do not risk your life or your family's life. That is clear. Look, I don't think this is the time to be having discussions in relation to bills of that sort of issuing fines. This is the time to be saying very clearly, once again, to people across our state, whether you're in the north or if floods come to the south, do not drive through floodwaters. We say it every single time, yet we continue to see people taking that risk. That risk is not worth it.
And Premier, this was meant to be the return to work week for office workers into the CBD. Are you now telling Sydney-siders, stay home for the rest of this week, don't go into the...
Well, we've said today, show caution. And obviously we want people to come back to Sydney CBD. We've been talking about for that for some time. But based on, obviously, the advice from the Bureau, it's going to be a difficult week in our city, as we've seen those heavy rains go from the north. They're going to come in. We're seeing it in Sydney today, and we'd expect that to go further south towards the back end of the week. But ultimately, right now, we say to people right across our city, right across our state, look after yourself, follow the advice, stay safe, and we'll all get through. Thanks.
Thank you.